But it was the gift left behind the next day that revealed a secret capable of destroying her family. Now she must choose between love and truth before it's too late. Watch this story until the end. You'll be surprised by this story. If you like love stories, romance, subscribe to this channel. Leave your comment. Every day we post videos like this. Continuing. Emily Morgan always had the impression that life observed her sideways, as if she were a calculation error that the universe had not yet decided how to correct. At 24, she carried on her shoulders the weight of a responsibility she had never asked for, and a loneliness that had become her most constant companion. Every morning she woke up in the small apartment in Greenwich Village that she shared only with the fragmented memories of a mother who no longer recognized her, and prepared for another day at Cassiopeia Publishing. The publishing house was located in an old building in the Soho area, one of those with noisy elevators and poorly lit corridors that seemed to sigh with each step. The smell of aged paper and faded ink permeated every corner, mixed with the persistent aroma of reheated coffee and resignation. Emily knew every creak of the parquet floor, every damp stain on the walls, every rejected manuscript that accumulated in disorderly piles on her desk. As an administrative assistant, she was responsible for organizing correspondence, filing contracts, and primarily doing the initial screening of manuscripts that arrived daily. Stories of impossible love, poorly constructed thrillers, melancholic memoirs of people who believed they had something important to tell the world. Emily read everything with the same devoted attention she dedicated to household bills. Meticulous, silent, never letting on if those words touched her in any way. Mr. Davidson, the publishing house director, was a 72-year-old man who smoked Cuban cigars, even though his doctor had forbidden it. He had always disheveled white hair and wore linen suits that had seen better days. He was kind to Emily, treated her as if she were a distant daughter, and sometimes she felt that he saw something in her that she herself couldn't see. That Thursday morning, when the New York autumn was beginning to show signs that it would arrive earlier than expected, Emily was organizing a pile of manuscripts when she heard the familiar sound of the elevator. But there was something different about the sound of approaching footsteps. They were firm, decisive, completely oblivious to the melancholic atmosphere that hung over the place. That's when she saw him for the first time. Adrian Salvatore Volkov entered the office like a force of nature. Tall, with broad shoulders that seemed to have been sculpted by someone who understood geometry and power. He wore a dark, impeccably cut suit that contrasted with the studied informality of the environment. His hair was dark brown, combed back, and his eyes were an almost golden amber that seemed to capture and return light differently. But it was the scar that caught Emily's attention. A thin, almost imperceptible line that cut across the left corner of his lower lip, giving his smile an air of controlled danger, as if even his gestures of kindness carried a veiled threat. "Good morning," he said, and his voice had a slight accent that she couldn't identify. "I'd like to speak with Mr. Davidson." Emily felt that the air in the room had changed density. "He's in a meeting at the moment. Do you have an appointment?" Adrian observed her for a few seconds, and she had the strange sensation of being catalogued, not in an invasive or disrespectful way, but as if he were memorizing every detail of her face, every inflection in her voice. "I don't have an appointment," he replied, approaching her desk. "But I believe he'll want to see me. My name is Adrian Volkov." The surname sounded familiar, although Emily couldn't place where she had heard it before. There was something about him that sparked her curiosity and, at the same time, a primitive instinct for self-preservation. It was like being in front of a wild animal that decided to behave in a civilized manner, but that at any moment could remember its true nature. "I'll check if he can receive you," she said, rising from her chair. When she passed by him on her way to the director's office, she smelled his cologne. It wasn't a common fragrance, the kind sold in any store. It was something more sophisticated, with notes of wood and spices that seemed to tell a story of distant places and experiences she would never have. Davidson looked up from the manuscript he was reading when she knocked on the door. "What is it, dear?" "There's a man here who would like to speak with you," Adrian Volkov. The director's expression changed instantly. The manuscript slipped from his hands, and he rose from his chair with a haste he hadn't shown in years. Volkov, he repeated as if he needed to be sure he had heard correctly. Send him in immediately. Emily returned to the reception area, where Adrian was waiting on his feet, observing the books on the shelves with genuine interest. There was something in the way he looked at objects that intrigued her. It wasn't the look of someone who saw only merchandise or investment, but of someone who understood the sentimental value of things. "Mr. Davidson can see you now," she said. "Thank you." He paused, then added, "What's your name?" "Emily. Emily Morgan." "Emily," he repeated, and the way he pronounced her name made it sound different, as if it were a word in an older and more elegant language. "A beautiful name. It means industrious, doesn't it?" She was surprised that he knew the meaning. Most people didn't even bother to ask. "Yes," she replied, feeling her face heat up slightly. Adrian smiled, and for the first time she saw how the scar on his lip transformed that expression into something unique. It wasn't a defect. It was a mark of identity, like a signature left by life. "Fitting," he said before heading to the director's office. Emily returned to her desk, but found it impossible to concentrate on work. The conversation in the room next door was conducted in a low voice, but occasionally she heard exclamations of surprise coming from Davidson. Gradually she began to realize that this visit wasn't casual. There was a formality in tone, a seriousness that suggested that important decisions were being made. 40 minutes later, the two men left the room. Davidson looked older, as if the conversation had drained years from his life. Adrian, on the contrary, maintained the same calm composure as when he had arrived. "Emily," called the director, "can you prepare coffee for Mr. Volkov? He'll be spending quite a bit of time here over the next few days." "Next few days?" she asked, unable to disguise her curiosity. "Mr. Volkov is our new owner," Davidson said, and there was something in his voice that seemed a mixture of relief and melancholy. "The publishing house changed hands today." Emily felt the ground disappear beneath her feet, not so much because of the change itself, which was something everyone had expected for months given the company's financial situation, but because of the sudden and silent way everything had happened. And mainly because of the way Adrian was watching her, as if he were waiting for her reaction. "Don't worry," he said, addressing her directly. "Nothing will change drastically, at least not for now." There was something in the way he said "for now" that made her feel a chill down her spine. It wasn't a threat, but it wasn't exactly a guarantee either. In the days that followed, Adrian began to frequent the publishing house regularly. He always arrived in the middle of the morning, impeccably dressed, and installed himself in the meeting room with piles of documents and a silver laptop that he operated with agile and precise fingers. Sometimes he spoke on the phone in a language that Emily couldn't identify, but which sounded Slavic and full of authority. Curiously, he seemed interested in the actual operation of the publishing house, not just in the numbers or contracts, but in the manuscripts, the authors, the editorial process. Several times he asked to see originals that were being evaluated, and his observations were always pertinent and demonstrated a surprising knowledge of literature. "Do you read all the manuscripts that arrive?" he asked one afternoon, approaching Emily's desk with a cup of coffee in hand. "I do the initial screening," she replied, trying to maintain a professional tone. "I select those that have potential to be evaluated by the editors." "And how do you decide what has potential?" It was a simple question, but one that no one had asked before. Emily paused, thinking about how to explain something that for her was more intuition than method. "I look for authenticity," she finally said. "Stories that sound true even when they're fiction. People who write because they need to, not because they want to impress." Adrian observed her for a long moment, and she again had the sensation of being catalogued, as if he were creating a mental file of her characteristics. "Interesting," he said. "And you? Do you write?" "No," she answered quickly. "Perhaps two." "Quickly. I've never had time for that." Time, he repeated, as if the word had a special meaning. Yes, time is a luxury that not everyone can afford. There was something melancholy in the way he said this, as if speaking from personal experience. Emily wanted to ask about his life, about where he came from, about what had brought him there, but couldn't find the courage. There was an invisible barrier around Adrian, a kind of force field that discouraged personal questions. The following week, he began to bring lunch for all the employees, not ordinary food, but elaborate meals, from an expensive restaurant in the area. He said it was a way to thank the team for their dedication during the transition, but Emily noticed that he always made sure that she received the most generous portion. "You don't eat enough," he commented on one of these occasions, watching her poke at her salad distractedly. "How do you know that?" she asked, genuinely curious. "Observation," he said simply. "It's a professional habit." "What profession requires observing whether people eat enough?" Adrian smiled, and again the scar transformed the expression into something enigmatic. "Many, actually, but especially those that involve caring for important things." The way he said important things while looking directly at her made Emily feel her cheeks warm. There was something in the intensity of that golden gaze that left her simultaneously uncomfortable and fascinated. Gradually, she began to notice that Adrian had a habit of appearing whenever she needed something. When the printer jammed, he was there to help. When she spilled coffee on her white blouse, he appeared with an impeccably folded handkerchief. When she had difficulties opening a heavy file, his hands appeared over hers on the keyboard, guiding her through the process. The touch was brief, professional, but left a mark that she felt for the rest of the day. His hands were warm and firm, with calluses that suggested that not all of his life had been spent behind executive desks. "You have strong hands," she said impulsively, and immediately regretted the personal observation. Consequence of a different youth, he answered, removing his hands slowly. "I wasn't always this. What were you before?" For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. His eyes moved away, focusing on some distant point beyond the window, as if he were accessing memories stored in locked compartments. "Someone who needed to use his hands to survive," he finally said. "But that was a long time ago." There was a deep sadness in that statement, a melancholy that contrasted with the image of success and power that he projected. Emily felt a strange desire to comfort him, to say something that could alleviate whatever pain he was carrying. But before she could find the words, he had already composed himself, returning to the mask of courteous professionalism. The weeks passed, and Adrian's presence at the publishing house became part of the routine. Emily began to expect him, to look for signs of his arrival, to miss him when he didn't appear. It was a new and disturbing feeling, a break in the carefully constructed order of her life. She had never felt attracted to someone before. There had been some boys in school, colleagues at work who showed interest, but nothing that made her question her decision to keep romance at a distance, not for lack of opportunity, but for a kind of instinctive self-preservation. As if she knew that once she allowed someone to truly get close, there would be no going back. But Adrian was different. He wasn't trying to get close in the traditional sense. He didn't openly flirt, didn't make obvious invitations, didn't use any of the tactics that she had learned to recognize and avoid. Instead, he simply existed in the same space as her, creating a gravitational tension that pulled her toward him without her being able to resist. There were moments when she caught him looking at her, and in those instances, it was as if the rest of the world disappeared. It wasn't an invasive or disrespectful look, but something deeper, as if he were trying to decipher an enigma that she herself didn't know she represented. "Do you have family?" she asked one afternoon when they were alone in the publishing house. The other employees had left early, and Davidson was at home with the flu. "Not in the traditional sense," Adrian replied, looking up from the document he was reading. "And you?" "My mother," she said, "but she's sick. Early onset Alzheimer's." For the first time since she had known him, she saw something that seemed like genuine vulnerability cross his face. "I'm sorry," he said, and there was real sincerity in his voice. "That must be very difficult." "It is," she admitted, Sometimes she doesn't recognize me. Other times it's as if I were a child again. It's strange to be responsible for someone who used to take care of you." Adrian rose from his chair and approached her desk. For a moment, Emily thought he was going to touch her, offer some gesture of consolation. Instead, he leaned on the edge of the desk, close enough for her to feel the heat of his body. "And your father?" The question came casually, but there was something in the way he asked it that triggered a silent alarm in Emily's mind, as if the answer were more important than he was letting on. "He disappeared when I was little," she said, feeling the familiar pang of pain that always accompanied this subject. "My mother never talked much about it. She said he had to travel for work and never came back." "How old were you?" 4 years old. Why?" Adrian was silent for a long moment, and she could see something passing through his eyes, a decision being made, a calculation being performed. "Just curiosity," he finally said, but his voice didn't sound convincing. "It's hard to grow up without a father." "Did you also grow up without a father?" "I grew up without many things," he replied, returning to his chair, "but I learned that sometimes absences are more informative than presences." Once again, there were layers in his words that Emily couldn't decipher. It was as if every conversation with him were a puzzle of which she could only see some pieces. That night, she stayed at the publishing house until later, organizing the manuscripts that had arrived during the week. Adrian was also working, concentrating on spreadsheets and reports that seemed to never end. The publishing house in the silence of the night had a different atmosphere, more intimate, as if the two were the only inhabitants of a particular world. "Emily," he said suddenly, making her look up, "have you ever thought about doing something different with your life?" The question caught her off guard. "What do you mean?" "Travel, see new places, try things you've never tried." There was something in the way he asked the question that made her feel that it wasn't just casual conversation. It was as if he were testing something, evaluating her response. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but it's not something I can afford to think about much. I have responsibilities. And if the responsibilities were temporarily resolved." "What do you mean?" Adrian stood up and walked to the window, observing the illuminated city below. When he turned to look at her again, there was an intensity in his eyes that she had never seen before. "I mean that sometimes opportunities appear in unexpected ways, and when they appear, it's important to be ready to recognize them." "Are you talking about some specific opportunity?" "Maybe," he said, approaching her again. "There's an event next Friday, a gallery opening. I'd like you to come with me." Emily felt her heart race. It wasn't exactly an invitation for a date, but it also wasn't a common work event. "I don't have suitable clothes for that kind of thing," she said, the first excuse that came to mind. "That can be resolved," he replied simply. "The question is, would you like to go?" She looked at him for a long moment, trying to decipher his intentions. There was danger in that invitation. She could feel it. Not physical danger, but something more subtle and potentially more destructive. It was the danger of allowing herself to want something that was beyond her reach, of opening herself to possibilities that could change everything. But there was also an irresistible curiosity, a desire to discover what existed beyond the carefully constructed limits of her life. "Yes," she finally said, "I would like to go." The smile he gave her in response was different from all the others. There was no mystery or calculation in it, just a genuine joy that completely transformed his face. For a moment, she saw not the powerful and enigmatic businessman, but a man who had just heard the answer he was waiting for. "Great," he said. "I'll pick you up at 7. After he left, Emily stayed alone in the silent publishing house, processing what had just happened. She had crossed an invisible line, agreed to enter unknown territory, and as frightening as that was, it was also the first time in a long time that she felt that something interesting was about to happen in her life. She didn't know that that decision would change everything, that in a week she would be discovering secrets that would shake the foundations of everything she believed she knew about herself, that the man who fascinated her carried connections to her past in ways she could never have imagined. For now, all she knew was that something had begun. Something that could no longer be undone. Emily spent the next 3 days in a state of constant anxiety that alternated between excitement and panic. She had accepted the invitation on impulse, driven by a curiosity she couldn't explain, but now that the reality of the commitment was approaching, she began to question her decision. What kind of event would it be? How should she behave? And mainly, what did Adrian expect from that night? On Thursday, an elegant box appeared on her desk at the publishing house. It was large, wrapped in silver paper and tied with a black velvet ribbon. There was no card, but she immediately knew who it was from. Her hands trembled slightly when she undid the bow. Inside, carefully folded between layers of tissue paper, was the most beautiful dress she had ever seen. It was a deep blue that reminded her of the sky at the end of the afternoon, made of a fabric that seemed liquid to the touch. The cut was elegant without, being excessively revealing, with 3/4 sleeves and a discreet neckline that suggested sophistication. Along with the dress, there were medium-heeled shoes of the same color, a small and delicate purse, and something that made her heart race. A set of French lace lingerie, also blue, that seemed to have been chosen by someone who perfectly knew her measurements. The fact that he had gotten the size of everything right, including the intimate pieces, should have frightened her. Instead, it aroused a strange excitement, as if he had demonstrated an attention to details that went beyond the professional. There was something intensely personal in that gift, an implied intimacy that made her feel exposed and desired at the same time. "It matches your eyes," said a voice behind her. Emily turned quickly, finding Adrian standing a few steps away. She hadn't heard his arrival, absorbed as she was in the discovery of the gift. "It's too beautiful," she said, feeling her cheeks blush. "But I can't accept something like this. It must have cost a fortune." "Money isn't a concern," he replied, approaching the desk. "And yes, you can accept it. It's just a dress." "It's not just a dress, and you know it." Adrian stopped in front of her, and again she had the sensation of being studied by those golden eyes. There was something different about him that day, an intensity that seemed closer to the surface. "You're right," he finally said. "It's not just a dress. It's a declaration of intentions." "What intentions?" "Mine," he replied simply, "and perhaps yours too, if you're honest with yourself." The direct way he said this made something contract in Emily's stomach. It wasn't uncomfortable, it was electrifying, as if he had put into words something that she had been trying to deny to herself. "I don't know how to act in this kind of situation," she admitted with an honesty that surprised her. "Then act like yourself," he said, extending his hand to lightly touch her face. The touch was brief but left a mark of warmth on her skin. "It's all I need." On Friday, Emily left work early to get ready. At home, she took a long shower, washed her hair with unusual care, and applied makeup with more attention than she had in years. When she put on Adrian's gift, she felt transformed. The mirror reflected a version of herself that she didn't completely recognize, more confident, more feminine, more dangerous. At 7 o'clock sharp, the doorbell rang. Emily opened the door and was left breathless. Adrian wore a black tuxedo that seemed to have been tailor-made, with a black tie and cufflinks that discreetly shined. His hair was combed back, accentuating the strong structure of his face, and the cologne that she had learned to associate with him was more intense in the cool night. "You look stunning," he said, and there was a genuine reverence in his voice that made her feel truly beautiful for the first time in her life. "Thank you," she replied, trying to control her nerves. "You look very elegant, too." The car that awaited them on the street wasn't what she had imagined. Instead of an ostentatious limousine, it was a discreet but obviously expensive black sedan. The driver, a middle-aged man with a military appearance, respectfully nodded to Adrian before opening the door for Emily. "Nicholas has been taking care of my security for many years," Adrian explained when they settled into the back seat. "He's one of the few people I completely trust." "You need security?" she asked, curious. "Everyone who has something to lose needs security," he replied, but there was something somber in the way he said it. The world can be a dangerous place for those who aren't prepared. The gallery was in a wealthy West Side neighborhood. in a modern building with a glass facade that reflected the city lights. When they arrived, Emily realized that it wasn't a small event. There were photographers at the entrance, expensive, cars parked on the street, elegantly dressed people walking toward the building. "I didn't know it would be something so big," she said, feeling the nerves return. "You'll be fine," said Adrian, taking her hand and intertwining their fingers. "Just stay close to me." The touch of their hands sent an electric current through Emily's arm. It was the first time he had touched her in a clearly intimate way, and she discovered that she didn't want him to let go. Inside the gallery, the atmosphere was sophisticated but welcoming. The white walls displayed black and white photographs, of impressive artistic quality, and there were small groups of people conversing in low voices while tasting champagne and canapés. Emily recognized some faces from magazines and newspapers, people from the worlds of arts and business whom she had only seen in photographs. Adrian guided her through the groups with natural ease, greeting people here and there, always keeping his hand on the small of her back in a gesture that was simultaneously protective and possessive. She noticed how people reacted to him, with respect certainly, but also with a kind of careful caution, as if he were someone too important to be ignored, but too dangerous to be underestimated. "Adrian, what a surprise to see you here." The female voice made them stop. A woman approached, tall and elegant, with perfectly arranged blonde hair and a red dress that cost more than Emily earned in a year. There was familiarity in the way she looked at Adrian, an intimacy that aroused a strange feeling in Emily's stomach. "Isabella," Adrian greeted, polite but distant. "How are you?" "Better now that you've appeared." Isabella's eyes fixed on Emily, with barely disguised curiosity. "And who is your companion? We haven't met." "Emily Morgan," said Adrian before she could respond. "Emily, this is Isabella Carter, an art curator." "Pleasure," said Emily, extending her hand. Isabella greeted her, but her eyes continued evaluating, as if she were trying to decipher what kind of woman had managed to capture Adrian's attention. "Interesting," she finally said. "Do you work?" "With art, Emily." "With books," Emily replied. "I work at the publishing house that Adrian recently acquired." "Ah," Isabella's smile became sharper. "A work relationship, then?" There was something deprecating in the way she said it, as if suggesting that Emily didn't belong in that environment. Before Emily could respond, she felt Adrian's hand squeeze her waist lightly. "If you'll excuse us, Isabella," he said, his voice maintaining courtesy, but carrying an authority that admitted no discussion. "We want to see the exhibitions." He moved her away before Isabella could respond, guiding her to a quieter area of the gallery. "Sorry about that," he said when they were alone. "Isabella has difficulties with boundaries. Did you have a relationship?" The question came out before she could think better of it. Adrian looked at her with surprise, then smiled in a way that made the scar on his lip more pronounced. "Jealous, Emily?" "Curiosity," she corrected, although she knew it wasn't completely true. "We did," he admitted. "A few years ago. It was brief and without consequences." "And why did it end?" "Because she wanted things that I couldn't give," he said, stopping, in front of a particularly impressive photograph, "and because I was waiting for something that I didn't know what it was at the time." "And now you know?" Adrian turned to look at her directly, and the intensity in his eyes made her feel difficulty breathing. "Now I know," he said simply. They spent the rest of the night exploring the gallery, talking about the photographs, about art, about things that Emily had never had the opportunity to discuss with someone. Adrian was a fascinating interlocutor, demonstrating knowledge that went far beyond business. He spoke about history, literature, music, always with insights that revealed a refined education and a curious mind. "How do you know so much about so many things?" she asked, as they observed a series of urban landscape photographs. "I had an unconventional education," he replied, "and time to cultivate diverse interests." "Where did you grow up?" For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. His eyes moved away, focusing on some distant point, and she could see something that seemed like pain pass across his face. In various places, he finally said. We never stayed very long in the same place when I was a child. Why? Because sometimes it's necessary to move to survive. There was a deep sadness in that statement, a pain that he tried to hide but that showed through in moments of distraction. Emily felt a strange desire to comfort him, to discover what wounds he carried, and perhaps help heal them. When they left the gallery, it was already past midnight. The city was quieter, the streets less busy, and there was an intimacy in the atmosphere that didn't exist during the day. Would you like to see something special? Adrian asked when they settled into the car. What kind of special thing? My home, he said, and there was something vulnerable in the way he made the invitation. If you want, of course. Nicholas can take you home if you prefer. Emily knew that accepting that invitation meant crossing a definitive line. There was no way to pretend that going to his house would be something innocent or casual. It was a decision that would change everything between them, and once taken there would be no going back. Yes, she said, surprising herself with the firmness of her own voice. I'd like to see. Adrian's apartment was on the top floor of a building in the Upper East Side, and when the elevator opened directly into the living room, Emily was left speechless. It was a spacious and modern space, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the city. The decoration was elegant but not ostentatious, with contemporary design furniture in neutral tones and some carefully selected pieces of art. But what impressed her most were the books. There were built-in shelves on an entire wall, filled with volumes in different languages. She approached, recognizing classics of world literature, treatises on philosophy, history books, some titles she had never heard of. Do you really read all of this? She asked, running her fingers over the spines. Most of it, he replied, taking off his jacket and loosening his tie. Books were a constant companion during many lonely years. There was melancholy in this confession, a loneliness that contrasted with the image of power and success that he projected. Emily turned to look at him and was surprised to find him watching her with an almost painful intensity. What is it? She asked. You, he said, approaching slowly. You in this space. It's perfect, in a way I didn't expect. Adrian, may I kiss you, Emily? The question was asked in a low voice, almost a whisper, but carried a weight that she felt in every fiber of her body. She nodded, unable to find words, and when he approached, she felt as if the entire world were reorganizing around them. The kiss was different from anything she had imagined. It started soft, almost hesitant, as if he were giving her the chance to back away. But when she responded, deepening the contact, something changed. There was hunger in that kiss, a need that seemed to come from a deep and desperate place. His hands found her face, his fingers tangled in her hair, and she felt as if she were losing herself in something greater than herself. When they separated, both were breathing with difficulty. Adrian's golden eyes were dark with desire, but there was also something that seemed like vulnerability. How long has it been since you... he began, then stopped. Never, she said, the honesty coming out without her being able to control it. His expression changed instantly. Surprise, then something that seemed like reverence. Never? Never, she repeated, feeling her cheeks warm. I know it must seem strange in a woman my age, but... It doesn't seem strange, he said, interrupting her. It seems precious. The way he said this with so much sincerity and care made something break inside her. All the barriers she had built over the years, all the carefully maintained defenses collapsed at once. I want to, she said, almost in a whisper. With you. Now. His eyes closed for a moment, as if he were fighting some internal battle. When he opened them again, there was a decision there. Are you sure? Absolutely. He picked her up with an ease that made her feel small and protected at the same time. The bedroom was an extension of the elegance of the rest of the apartment, but Emily barely had time to register the details. All her attention was focused on the man who gently deposited her on the king-size bed, as if she were made of crystal. What followed was a slow and reverent discovery. Adrian undressed her as if he were revealing a work of art, his hands exploring every inch of exposed skin with an attention that was almost adoration. He whispered her name like a prayer, and when they finally united, it was with a gentleness that contrasted with the intensity of desire that emanated from him. There was pain, as she expected, but there was also something transcendent, a sensation of completeness that she had never imagined possible. When he moved inside her, his eyes never left hers, as if he wanted to memorize every expression, every sigh, every moment of that surrender. Afterward, they lay intertwined in the silence of the early morning, bodies still connected, breathing gradually normalizing. Adrian caressed her hair with fingers that trembled slightly, and she could feel the accelerated beats of his heart against her chest. "Emily," he finally said, his voice hoarse with emotion. "Yes?" "Thank you." "For what?" "For trusting me," he said, kissing the top of her head. "For letting me be the first." There was something in the way he said this that intrigued her. It wasn't just gratitude for the offered virginity, but something deeper, as if that moment had meant something special for him too. "Adrian?" "Yes?" "Have you ever felt this before? With another person?" He was silent for so long that she thought he had fallen asleep. When he finally spoke, his voice was laden with a melancholy that made her want to cry. "No," he said, "never like this. Never with so much meaning." Emily fell asleep in his arms, feeling safe and loved in a way she had never experienced. Her dreams were filled with images of golden eyes and gentle hands, with the sensation of having finally found her place in the world. When she woke up, the morning sun filtered through the curtains, creating patterns of light and shadow on the empty bed. Adrian had departed, leaving only his cologne on the pillow and a feeling of abandonment that made her question whether everything had been real. She dressed quickly in the clothes from the previous night, feeling lost and vulnerable in the silent apartment. It was when she was looking for her shoes that she saw the box on the living room armchair. It was small black velvet and was clearly meant for her. With trembling hands, she opened it. Inside, there were 3 items that changed everything. A property deed for an apartment in Brooklyn with her name as the owner. An access card to an international bank account with a balance that made her legs tremble, and a yellowed photograph that made her world collapse. The photo showed 2 young men, smiling somewhere that looked like Eastern Europe. One of them she recognized immediately from the few photographs her mother had kept. It was John Morgan, her father, 20 years younger. The other, tall and with light eyes, took a few seconds for her to identify. But when she did, she felt as if the floor had disappeared beneath her feet. It was Adrian, or rather it was someone almost identical to Adrian, but clearly younger from the same era as the photograph. On the back, in handwriting she didn't recognize, was written, "John and Michael, Bucharest, 1993, 2 years before Emily's birth." Michael. Not Adrian. Her hands were shaking so much that she almost dropped the photograph. 2,000 questions bombarded her mind at the same time, but one stood out above all others. Who was really the man with whom she had spent the night? Emily stood frozen in the middle of the living room for who knows how long, holding the photograph with fingers that trembled so much that the image seemed to vibrate. Her mind refused to fully process what she was seeing, as if it were information too large to fit into her carefully organized reality. John Morgan, her father, the man who had disappeared when she was 4 years old, leaving only fragmented memories and an absence that shaped her entire life. There he was, young and smiling, next to someone who was unquestionably related to the man with whom she had just spent the most important night of her life. Michael, not Adrian. The words echoed in her head like a disturbing mantra. Had everything been a lie? The name, the identity, the circumstances of how they met, or was there an explanation that she still couldn't glimpse? She looked again at the other items in the box. The apartment deed was perfectly legal, with her full name and SSN correct. The bank card had her name engraved in golden letters. How had he gotten this information? How long had he been planning this? The phone rang, making her jump. It was an unknown number, but something made her answer. "Emily." Adrian's voice sounded distant, almost hesitant. "Where are you?" The question came out more aggressive than she intended. "I had to resolve some urgent matters, but I need to talk to Jailsteward's about the photograph." The silence on the other end of the line extended for so long that she thought the call had dropped. "You found it," he finally said, and there was something that seemed like relief in his voice. "Who is Michael?" "That was my name. Before." "Before? What?" "Before many things." His voice was laden with fatigue. "I can explain everything, but not over the phone. Can you meet me?" "I don't know if I want explanations," she said, though she knew it was a lie. "I don't know if I can trust anything you say. I understand, but please give me a chance to—" "How did you know my father?" The question exploded from her, interrupting him. "And don't come at me with half-truths or made-up stories. I want the complete truth." Another silence. When he spoke again, his voice was lower, almost a whisper. "Your father saved my life," he said, "and I couldn't save his." The words hit Emily like a punch to the stomach. "What do you mean?" "Not over the phone, Emily. It's too dangerous. Can you come to the publishing house? I'll be there in an hour." Please," he said, and there was something desperate in his voice. "After everything that happened between us, you owe me at least this." The call ended before she could respond. Emily stood looking at the phone, torn between anger and a curiosity that consumed her. There were lies, evidently, but there was also the memory of the previous night, of the vulnerability she had seen in his eyes, of the way he had whispered her name as if it was something sacred. She dressed quickly, choosing comfortable and practical clothes as if she were preparing for a battle. She put the photograph in her purse along with the other documents and called a taxi to the publishing house. The building was empty on a Saturday morning, but she knew the elevator code. When she reached the publishing house floor, she found the door open and Adrian sitting at her work desk, still wearing the tuxedo from the previous night, but with the tie undone and his hair disheveled. There was a drink in his hands and an expression of deep exhaustion on his face. "Have you been drinking?" she asked, noticing the smell of whiskey in the air. "A little," he admitted, raising his eyes to her. "It's been a long night." "For me, too." They observed each other for a moment, and Emily felt the same magnetic attraction as always, but now tempered with distrust and hurt. It was like looking at a stranger who wore the face of someone she loved. "Show me the photograph," he said. She took the image from her purse and placed it on the desk between the two of them. Adrian looked at it for a long moment, and she could see pain cross his face. "Bucharest, 1993, he said, touching the edge of the photo carefully. "I was 17. Your father, 22. How did you meet?" Adrian stood up and walked to the window, looking at the city that was slowly waking up. "My mother worked for Romanian intelligence services," he began, without turning around. "Not by choice, but because there was no other option for a woman in her situation. When the Soviet Union began to disintegrate, many operations became loose. Abandoned agents, espionage networks without central command, valuable information without definite owners. And my father? Your father was an undercover agent, American, working for a consortium of companies that wanted information about privatizations in Eastern Europe. But he wasn't just a disguised businessman. He was intelligent, compassionate, and had a rare ability to gain people's trust. Emily felt a strange mixture of pride and fear. "Continue." "My mother fell in love with him," said Adrian, finally turning to look at her, or thought she fell in love. In truth, she was just a desperate woman, clinging to the first person who treated her with kindness in years. "And you?" "I was a child who grew up in environments where trust was a dangerous luxury, but your father, he treated me as if I were important. He taught me things. He protected me when others would have abandoned me." There was genuine emotion in his voice, a pain that seemed to come from a very deep place. Emily felt her anger begin to mix with something more confusing. What happened? Things got complicated. There was a change in governments, new political agreements, and suddenly the information your father had collected became much more valuable than anyone had anticipated. They weren't just data about companies that could be privatized. They were documents that could bring down governments, destroy careers, end entire fortunes. And he stole these documents. He tried to exit the operation, Adrian corrected. He wanted to return to the United States, to his pregnant wife. But when you're inside that kind of world, leaving isn't an option they easily offer. Emily felt her stomach contract. My mother was pregnant with me. Yes, and he talked about you constantly, even before you were born. He said it would be different, that he would raise his daughter in a world where she would never need to look over her shoulder. But he disappeared when I was 4 years old. Because they found him, Adrian's voice was laden with guilt, and because I couldn't warn him in time. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with implications that Emily was just beginning to understand. Did they kill him? I don't know, he said, returning to sit down. No one knows. He simply vanished. Some say he was killed. Others that he managed to escape and is living with a false identity somewhere. But the documents, he had disappeared with him. And you? I've spent the last 20 years looking for him, and for the documents. The confession came out as if it were forcibly extracted, and Emily felt as if an abyss had opened beneath her feet. That's why you found me, she said, her voice coming out as a whisper. It wasn't a coincidence. You bought the publishing house because I knew who you were, he confirmed, meeting her eyes. Because I thought that maybe through you I could discover what happened to him. And last night, was it just part of the plan? The question came out laden with pain, and she saw something break in his face. No, he said, standing up abruptly. Last night was the first real thing that happened in my life in a long time. How can I believe you? How can I believe anything you say? Because I'm telling you the truth now, even knowing that I might lose you forever. There was desperation in his voice, a vulnerability that contrasted violently with the image of control that he always projected. My name was Michael Volkov, he continued. I changed to Adrian Salvatore Volkov when I managed to leave Eastern Europe. I built a fortune, an identity, an entire life dedicated to finding answers. And yes, when I discovered where you were, I set up a whole operation to get close to you. A whole operation, she repeated, feeling nauseated. But when I met you, he said, approaching her slowly, when I began to see who you really were, everything changed. You weren't just John Morgan's daughter. You were Emily. You were intelligent and strong and beautiful in a way that went far beyond physical appearance. You were someone who made me remember what it's like to feel hope. Stop, she said, raising her hand. Just stop. Emily. You lied about everything. Your name, your history, the reasons why you were there. How can I believe that your feelings are real? Because I'm here, he said simply. Because instead of continuing with the original plan, I'm telling the truth. Because I could have gotten the information I wanted in other ways, but I couldn't use you like that. What information? Adrian hesitated, and she could see an internal struggle unfolding in his eyes. Your mother, he finally said. Before the disease, she knew things. Your father trusted her, told stories, left clues. I thought that maybe, through you, I could have access to those memories. My mother barely recognizes me on good days. I know. And when I realized that, when I saw how much you were suffering with her situation, I couldn't continue with the original plan. Emily let herself fall into the chair, feeling as if all the energy had been drained from her body. So you know where he is, she said. My father. You know if he's alive. I have clues, Adrian admitted, fragmented information that I've collected over the years, but nothing definitive. What kind of clues? He went to a folder that was on the director's desk and took out several documents, photographs, newspaper clippings, reports that seemed official. 3 years ago, a man with a physical description similar to his was seen in Vienna. He was using false documents, but had a specific scar on his left hand that your father had. Emily took the photograph he showed her. It was grainy, taken from a distance, showing a man from behind walking down a European street. It could be anyone. It could, he agreed. But there are other indications. Bank movements, use of codes he knew, behavioral patterns that are consistent. And why didn't you go after him? Because it's dangerous. The people who are looking for him are still alive, still have power, and because if he really managed to build a new life, maybe he doesn't want to be found. The idea that her father might be alive, but had chosen not to return to her, was almost more painful than imagining that he was dead. But now, Adrian continued, with you, it might be possible to discover the truth. How? By traveling to Vienna, following the clues, talking to people who were there at the time, and risking our lives in the process. Yes, he said, meeting her eyes, risking our lives. Emily looked at him for a long moment, trying to decipher if there was anything beyond guilt and desire for redemption in his offer. Why would you do this? She asked. After 20 years, why risk everything now? Because I owe it to him, said Adrian, and because selfishly it's the only way I can think of to maybe earn your forgiveness. My forgiveness. You have the right to hate me, he said. You have the right to never want to see me again. But before making that decision, let me try to fix at least one part of what was broken. Emily stood up and walked to the window, looking at the city that stretched beyond the glass. Her entire life had been defined by her father's absence, by the unanswered questions, by the feeling of being incomplete. Now, for the first time, there was the possibility of finding those answers, but the price would be trusting the man who had lied to her from the first moment. If I agree, she said without turning around, it's not because I've forgiven you. It's because I need to know the truth about my father. I understand. And I want some things clarified before we leave. Anything. First, I want to know everything about these documents he supposedly stole. Everything. They were information about economic intelligence operations in various Eastern European countries, details about bribes, blackmail, assassinations disguised as accidents, data that could implicate politicians, businessmen, even agents who are still active. And you want to find these documents? Yes, but not for the reasons you're thinking. What reasons? Adrian approached her, stopping a few steps away. Because some of the people mentioned in these documents are responsible for my mother's death, he said, his voice laden with an old pain. And because, as long as this information is lost, neither you nor I will be completely safe. Your mother died? 2 years after your father disappeared. Officially it was suicide, but I know it was murder. She knew too much, had become a risk. Emily felt an unexpected compassion for him. Both had lost their parents because of this world of secrets and lies into which they hadn't chosen to enter. The second thing I want to know, she said, is about us. About what happened last night. What do you want to know? If it was real, if any part of your feelings for me is genuine, or if everything was part of an elaborate plan. Adrian was silent for so long that she began to turn to look at him. When she did, she was surprised to see tears in his eyes. Last night was the first time in 20 years that I felt like a normal human being, he said. It was the first time I made love with someone, instead of just having sex. It was the first time I looked to the future and saw something beyond revenge and loneliness. Adrian. You want the complete truth? He said, approaching her. The truth is that I fell in love with you long before last night. I fell in love with the way you treat rejected manuscripts with the same care that you dedicate to the great classics. I fell in love with how you took care of your mother, even when she didn't recognize you. I fell in love with your silent strength, with your integrity, with your ability to find beauty in small things. Emily felt her resistance begin to crumble, but forced herself to maintain focus. And if we don't find my father, and if we discover that he's dead, then at least you'll have answers, he said. And maybe, if I'm very lucky, you'll allow me to be part of your life after that. As part of my life? As someone who loves you, he said simply. As someone who wants to protect you, care for you, build something real with you. Emily looked at him for a long moment, seeing not the powerful and mysterious businessman, but a broken man trying to find redemption. "I need time to process all of this," she finally said. "How much time?" "Until Monday. I'll think during the weekend and give you an answer." "And if the answer is no?" "Then you leave me in peace forever. No contact, no attempts at explanation, no expensive gifts. You'll leave my life as if you had never entered it. And if it's yes, then we travel to Vienna, but with some conditions." "Which ones?" "No lies. No half information. And if at any moment I feel that you're manipulating or using me, I stop everything and return home." "Accepted," he said immediately. "And one more thing," she said, heading to the door. "Never again make decisions about my life without consulting me. The gifts, the bank accounts, the apartments. None of that happens without my permission." "Understood." She stopped at the door without turning around. "Adrian." "Yes?" "The scar on your lip. How did it happen?" There was a pause before he answered. "A fight when I was 15. I was trying to protect my mother from a man who wanted to hurt her. I couldn't save her completely, but at least I managed to make him leave." Emily closed her eyes for a moment, feeling a strange pain in her chest. "I'll give you an answer on Monday," she said, leaving without looking back. When she arrived home, she found an envelope that had been left under her door. Inside there was a key and an address in Brooklyn. It was the apartment he had bought for her, she realized. The apartment that was now technically hers. She stood looking at the key for a long time, trying to decide what to do. Going there would be like accepting the gifts, like somehow becoming complicit in his questionable methods. But it was also her legal property now, and perhaps there were answers there. An hour later, she was standing in front of a modern and elegant building, holding the key and trying to gather courage to enter. The apartment was on the 8th floor, and when she opened the door, she was left breathless. It was perfect, not ostentatious, but carefully planned for her tastes. There was a library with empty shelves waiting to be filled, a small but functional kitchen, a spacious bedroom with a view of a park. It was the kind of place she had always dreamed of living, but had never dared imagine she could have. On the living room table, there was another envelope with her name. Inside, a handwritten letter. "Emily, this apartment is not a payment, nor an attempt to buy your forgiveness. It is simply a place where you can be safe, should you need a refuge. The keys to the other apartment are also here, should you prefer to return home. Whatever your decision on Monday, the apartment is yours. No conditions, no strings attached. I understand that I broke your trust. I understand that I may never be able to fully regain it. But I want you to know that these last few months, knowing you, have been the happiest of my life. If you decide to go to Vienna with me, know that I will do everything in my power to protect you and to find the answers you deserve. If you decide that you never want to see me again, I will respect your decision and disappear from your life. But in either case, I want you to be happy. I want you to have the life that your father would have wanted for you. With love and regret, Adrian." Emily sat on the new sofa, holding the letter and trying not to cry. Everything was too complicated, too laden, too dangerous. But for the first time in 20 years, there was a real possibility of discovering what had happened to her father. And despite all the pain and confusion, she knew that she loved Adrian, or Michael, or whoever he really was beneath all the layers of secrets and lies. The question was that love enough to justify the risk? She had until Monday to decide. During the weekend, Emily barely slept. She alternated between the old apartment and the new one, as if the change of environment could help her see the situation from different perspectives. In the old apartment, surrounded by the familiar memories and the comforting smell of home, she felt inclined toward safety, to maintain her small but predictable life. In the new apartment, bathed by the soft light that entered through the large windows, she felt a strange courage grow inside her, as if that space carried the promise of possibilities she had never dared to imagine. On Sunday morning, she visited her mother at the specialized clinic, where she had managed to get a place a few months earlier. She found Margaret Morgan sitting on the porch, looking at the garden with that distant expression that had become so familiar. Sometimes her mother recognized her. Other times she simply treated her as a kind nurse. That day she seemed to be somewhere between the two states. "Mom," said Emily, sitting next to her in the rocking chair, "can I ask you some questions about Dad?" Margaret turned her face to her, and for a moment her eyes had that clarity that sometimes still appeared like rays of sunshine passing through dense clouds. "John," she said, smiling. "My John. He'll be back soon, you know. He said it was just a business trip." "Mom, I'm an adult now. Dad left a long time ago." No," said Margaret, shaking her head firmly. "He called me last week, said things were complicated, but that he would soon be home." Emily felt her heart accelerate. Sometimes her mother's temporal confusions mixed decades, but occasionally there were fragments of surprising lucidity. "What things were complicated, Mom?" "The papers," said Margaret, lowering her voice as if it were a secret. "He said there were bad people after the papers he was keeping, but that he found a safe place to hide them." "What place?" "The music box," she answered, as if it were obvious. "The one he gave me when you were born. He said that if anything happened to him, I should give the box to you when you turned 25. Emily felt as if the air had been sucked from her lungs. "Mom, where is this music box?" But Margaret's eyes had already lost focus again, turning to the garden, as if the conversation had never happened. Emily spent the rest of Sunday searching through all the family belongings that were stored in the old apartment. She found photographs, letters, small personal objects, but no music box. If it really existed, it must be somewhere she hadn't yet looked. On Monday morning, she arrived at the publishing house with her decision made. But first, she needed an answer. She found Adrian in the meeting room, impeccably dressed as always, but with dark circles that suggested his weekend had been as sleepless as hers. "There's a music box," she said without preamble, closing the door behind her. Adrian looked up from the documents he was examining. "What do you mean?" "My mother said my father gave her a music box when I was born. She said that if anything happened to him, she should give me the box when I turned 25. And where is this box?" "I don't know. I can't find it anywhere." Adrian stood up, and she could see his mind quickly processing this new information. "A key. Music box would be a perfect hiding place," he said. "Small, discreet. Something a woman would keep for sentimental value without arousing suspicion. You think the documents could be there?" "It's possible. Your father was intelligent. He knew he would need a contingency plan." He paused, looking directly at her. "Does this change your decision?" Emily took a deep breath. "I'm going to Vienna with you." She saw clear relief cross his face, immediately followed by something that seemed like concern. "Are you sure?" "No," she said honestly. "But I need to know the truth, even if it means risking everything." "Emily, but with the conditions I established," she continued. "No lies, no decisions made for me, and I want to look for this music box before we leave." "Where do you think it might be?" "Maybe in my grandmother's old apartment. My mother kept some things there when we sold the house after she died." "Let's look now," said Adrian, already grabbing his jacket. Emily's grandmother's apartment was in Queens, in an old building that had seen better days. It was small, with just 2 bedrooms and a living room, but it had served as storage for the family belongings that she hadn't had the heart to discard. They spent 2 hours searching through dusty boxes, old trunks, and forgotten drawers. It was Adrian who found it, hidden inside. An old travel suitcase, a small carved wooden music box with a ballerina that spun when the music played. "This is it," said Emily, immediately recognizing the object. Fragmented childhood memories returned, her mother occasionally opening the box, letting the soft melody fill the room while the ballerina danced. With trembling hands, she opened the box. The familiar melody began to play, but now there was something different. The bottom of the box seemed higher than it should be. Adrian carefully examined the piece, and after a few minutes found a hidden mechanism. When pressed, it revealed a secret compartment. Inside, there was a small storage device of the type used in the 90s, along with a small key and a paper with handwritten numbers. "This is it," said Adrian, his voice laden with an emotion he was trying to control. 20 years searching, and it was here all along. What do we do now? We need to access this information, but not here. It's too dangerous. He looked at her seriously. This confirms that we need to go to Vienna. If these really are the information that disappeared with your father, there are people who would kill to have access to them, and would kill us for having found them. Yes, he said simply. So we need to be very careful from now on. They left the grandmother's apartment with more haste than they had entered, and Emily noticed that Adrian constantly checked if they were being followed. His paranoia was becoming contagious, and she began to feel a constant anxiety, as if invisible eyes were watching every movement. "When do we leave?" she asked when they returned to the publishing house. "Tonight, if possible. The longer we stay here, the greater the risk." "Tonight? But I need to prepare, pack things." "Don't take anything that could track you," he said. "No credit cards of yours, no documents besides your passport, no personal objects that might have tracking devices." The reality of the situation began to sink in. It wasn't just a trip to find answers about the past. It was an escape. "Adrian, what kind of situation am I getting myself into?" He stopped organizing the papers and turned to her, his expression both serious and caring at the same time. "A dangerous situation," he admitted, "but also the only real chance we have to discover the truth and maybe, finally, be free of this shadow that has pursued both you and me throughout our lives." That night, Emily silently said goodbye to her life in New York. She visited her mother one last time, promising to return soon, though she knew that might not be possible. Margaret was drowsy because of the medication, but managed to whisper something that made Emily's heart clench. "Tell John I still love him. Tell him I forgave him for having to leave." The flight to Vienna departed at 2 in the morning, and Adrian had arranged passports with fake names for both of them. It was the first time Emily had done something completely illegal, and the feeling was strange, terrifying and exciting at the same time. "How did you get these identities?" she asked in the taxi on the way to the airport. "Contacts I've cultivated." "Over the years," he replied vaguely. "People who owe favors, people who also have secrets to hide." JFK International Airport was surprisingly busy for the early morning. They passed through security without incident, but Emily noticed that Adrian was constantly vigilant, observing other passengers, checking exits, like a wild animal always ready to flee. Only when the plane took off did she feel some of the tension diminish. "I've never left the United States," she said, looking out the window at the lights of New York getting smaller and smaller. "It's a big world out there," said Adrian, covering her hand with his, "full of possibilities and dangers." "And you? Have you always traveled a lot?" "Since childhood, sometimes by choice, other times by necessity." They flew first class, and Emily tried not to think about the cost of the trip. The seat was comfortable, the food was good, but she could barely touch the meal. Anxiety was eating away at her stomach. "Tell me about Vienna," she said, trying to distract herself. "It's an ancient city, full of history and secrets. It was the center of many espionage operations during the Cold War, and some of those networks were never completely dismantled." "And you think my father is there?" "I think there are people there who know what happened to him," Adrian said carefully. "And now that we have this data, maybe they'll be willing to talk." The flight lasted 14 hours with a stopover in Frankfurt. For most of the time, Emily pretended to sleep, but in reality she was processing everything that had happened in the last few days. Her life had been turned upside down, and she was flying to a foreign country with a man who, despite everything, was still largely a mystery to her. But there was something comforting about Adrian's presence beside her. Even with all the lies and complications, she felt that she was safe with him. It was an irrational feeling, based more on intuition than logic, but it was real. Vienna welcomed them with a grey sky and a fine drizzle that gave the city a melancholic air. The airport was modern and efficient, and they passed through immigration without problems. Adrian seemed to know the way, guiding her through the terminals with familiarity. "You've been here before," she observed, "several times. Researching, following clues that never led to anything concrete." A car was waiting for them outside the airport. Not a taxi, but a black sedan, driven by a middle-aged man who greeted Adrian in German. They conversed briefly in a language she didn't understand, and she noticed that the driver was observing her with curiosity. "Who is he?" she asked when they settled into the back seat. "Franz, an old contact who helps me when I'm in the city." "Does he know why we're here?" "He knows enough." The hotel was in Vienna's historic center, an elegant building that seemed to be at least 200 years old. The room that Adrian had reserved was a spacious suite with a view of an ancient square, furnished with antiques that were probably worth more than she earned in a year. "We'll sleep in separate beds," said Adrian when they entered, noticing her expression upon seeing that there was only one room. "I don't want you to feel pressured or uncomfortable." It was a kind gesture, but one that also created a strange tension between them. The intimacy they had shared in New York seemed to belong to another world, to other people. Now they were partners in a dangerous mission, and the dynamic was completely different. "Where do we start?" she asked, taking off her jacket and warming up near the radiator. "First, we need to access the data from the music box. I have a contact who can help with that without leaving digital traces. And then we start following the clues. There are some places where your father was seen, people who might have information." Adrian took out his phone and made a quick call in German. When he hung up, he had a thoughtful expression. "Klaus can see us tomorrow morning. He has equipment to access old data without compromising security. And today we rest and prepare and maybe even talk." There was something in the way he said this that made Emily look at him more attentively. "Talk about what?" "About us. About what happens after we find the answers we came to seek." It was a conversation she had been avoiding since she made the decision to travel with him. Focusing on the mission was easier than facing the complicated feelings she had for him. "I don't know if this is a good time for that," she said. "Maybe it's the only time we have," he replied. "If things go badly here—" "Stop," she said, raising her hand. "Don't talk like that. Emily, you need to understand that there are real risks. People have died because of this information. And now we have it." The gravity of the situation hit her again, and she felt a wave of fear that she had been trying to repress. "Then why are you doing this?" she asked. "Why are you risking your life?" "Because I've spent 20 years living with guilt and remorse," he said, approaching her. "Because I know I owe this to your father, and because I can't build a future with you having these secrets between us. A future with me. If you want," he said, touching her face gently, "if we manage to get out of this situation alive and whole." Emily moved away from his touch, walking to the window. Outside, the city of Vienna stretched under the soft afternoon, light, full of history and mysteries. "I don't know if I can do this," she said. "I don't know if I can separate the man I fell in love with from the man who lied to me from the first day." "Then let me show you who I really am," he said. "No. Lies, no masks, no strategies. And who are you really?" Adrian was silent for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was laden with a vulnerability she had never heard before. "I'm a man who lost his family very early and spent his entire life trying to find a purpose. I'm someone who built a fortune and a reputation, but who until meeting you had never had a home. I'm someone who has committed terrible mistakes, but who is trying to make peace with the past." He approached her again, stopping a few inches away. "And I'm someone who loves you more than I thought it was possible to love another person." Emily felt tears prick her eyes. "How can I trust that? How can I trust anything you say?" "Because I'm here," he said simply. "Because, instead of using the information we found for my own purposes, I'm risking everything to help you find your father." It was true, she realized. He could have taken the data from the music box and disappeared. He could have used the information for his own benefit. Instead, he was there, vulnerable and honest in a way that clearly cost him a lot. That night they had dinner at the hotel restaurant, a silent meal during which both were lost in thought. Afterward, they returned to the room and prepared to sleep in separate beds as he had promised. But in the middle of the night, Emily woke up with nightmares about her father, about faceless men chasing her through dark streets. When she got up trembling, she found Adrian sitting in the armchair next to the window observing the street below. "Can't sleep?" she asked. "Old habit," he said. "I'm always vigilant in unfamiliar places." "Are you watching over us?" "Always," he admitted. "It's my responsibility to keep you safe." Emily approached him, and for the first time since the discovery of the photograph, she felt the impulse to seek comfort in his presence. "Can I stay here with you?" He looked at her for a moment, then opened his arms. She nestled against him, in the armchair, feeling the warmth and solidity of his body, the constant rhythm of his breathing. "Everything will be all right," he said, kissing the top of her head. "How can you be sure?" "Because I won't let anything happen to you," he said, and there was an iron determination in his voice that made her believe, at least in that moment, that maybe everything really could be all right. She fell asleep in his arms, and for the first time in days, she didn't have nightmares. The next morning they would begin the search that could finally reveal the truth about John Morgan's disappearance. But it would also be the beginning of the greatest danger that either of them had ever faced. The morning arrived with a sky heavy with clouds that seemed to carry the weight of the city's secrets. Emily woke still in Adrian's arms, feeling for the first time in days a genuine sense of protection. But the reality of their mission quickly took over her thoughts when he stirred, also awakening. "How are you feeling?" he asked, gently moving a strand of hair from her face. "Nervous," she admitted. "And you?" "Focused," he replied, but she could see the tension in his eyes. "Klaus is expecting us in an hour. We should get ready." They ate breakfast in silence in the hotel restaurant, both lost in thoughts about what they might discover. Emily noticed that Adrian constantly checked the people around them, his self-preservation training always active. She was beginning to understand that living constantly looking over one's shoulder had become second nature to him. Klaus Hoffmann lived in a discreet house in the Leopoldstadt district, a neighborhood that mixed old elegance with functional modernity. He was a thin man in his 60s, with thick glasses and fingers stained with nicotine. His house looked like a technology museum, with equipment from different eras meticulously organized on shelves that covered all the walls. "Michael," he said in German when he opened the door, embracing Adrian like an old friend. "Klaus, thank you for receiving us," Adrian replied, naturally switching to English. "This is Emily." Klaus greeted her politely, but his eyes were cautious. "She knows. The risks." "She knows," Adrian confirmed, "and she still chose to come." "Brave or reckless," muttered Klaus, guiding them to a room at the back of the house that looked like a laboratory. "Sometimes it's hard to tell the difference." "A little of both, I imagine," said Emily, surprising herself with her own frankness. Klaus smiled for the first time. "Honesty, I like that. Very rare in our circles." They spent the next hour watching Klaus work with the storage device from the music box. It was a delicate process, involving old machines and technical knowledge that clearly only he possessed. As he worked, he casually talked about the old days, about operations that had gone wrong, about people who had disappeared in the night. "Ah," he said finally, when a small screen lit up. "Here we are." The device contained hundreds of files, organized in folders with codes that seemed random. But Klaus navigated through them with familiarity, as if he understood the organization system. "Your father was meticulous," he told Emily. "Each document catalogued, each piece of information verified. He was an exemplary professional." "What's in the files?" she asked, trying to control her anxiety. "Everything," Klaus replied simply. "Names, dates, locations, money transfers, photographs, audio recordings, 2 decades of economic intelligence operations documented in detail." Adrian approached the screen, examining the files. "This is enough to bring down governments." "And to sign death warrants," Klaus added grimly. "That's why your father disappeared, and that's why you're in danger now." "Is there any information about what happened to him?" Emily asked. Klaus clicked on a specific folder. There's a video recorded a few weeks before he disappeared. You might want to watch it. The screen showed a man whom Emily immediately recognized, even 20 years older than in the photographs she kept. John Morgan was sitting in a simple chair, looking directly at the camera. He seemed tired but determined. "If you're watching this," said the familiar voice she hadn't heard in 2 decades, "it means something has happened to me. Emily, my dear daughter, I hope you've grown up strong and happy, even without me." Emily felt tears spring to her eyes. It was the first time she had heard her father's voice since childhood, and the emotional impact was overwhelming. "I made mistakes," John continued. "I got involved in things I shouldn't have for money our family needed. But when I discovered the true nature of the operations, I tried to get out. That wasn't accepted." He paused, looking down for a moment before continuing. "If something happens to me, I want you to know that I love you both more than life. Margaret, forgive me for not being the husband you deserved. Emily, forgive me for not being there to see you grow up." "Dad," Emily whispered, touching the screen, "I'm trying to find a way to stay safe, to come back to you. But if I can't, I want you to know that everything I did was trying to protect our family. The documents I'm hiding are my only life guarantee. As long as they aren't found, I might have a chance." The video continued with John explaining details about where he had hidden copies of the documents, codes that could be used to access them, and names of people who could help in case of emergency. "There's a man named Michael Volkov," he said, and Emily felt Adrian tense beside her. "He was just a boy when I met him, but he was intelligent and loyal. If you can find him, maybe he can help you." The video ended with John blowing kisses to the camera, promising he would do everything to come home. The silence that followed was heavy and laden with emotion. Emily was crying openly now, 20 years of longing and unanswered questions finally finding a voice. "He talked about you," she said to Adrian. "He saved me," he replied, his voice hoarse, "and I failed to save him." "It's not over yet," said Klaus, closing the video file. "There's more information here, including something you'll want to see." He opened another file, this one containing what appeared to be recent surveillance reports. "John Morgan didn't die," Klaus said calmly, "at least not in 1999. Emily felt as if the world had stopped spinning. "What do you mean?" "There are records of someone with his physical description and fingerprints being detained in an unofficial facility on the border between Austria and Hungary. This was just 3 years ago." 3 years? Emily could barely process the information. "Is he alive?" "He was 3 years ago," Klaus corrected. "I can't guarantee that he still is." "Where is this facility?" Adrian asked. "It's complicated," said Klaus, closing the files and turning to them. "It's not an official prison. It's a place where inconvenient people are kept. Indefinitely." "A black hole," said Adrian, understanding. "Exactly. People go in, but they don't come out, and they don't appear in any official records." Emily stood up abruptly, walking around the small room. "We have to go there. We have to find him." "Emily," Adrian said carefully, "it's extremely dangerous. These facilities are guarded, isolated, and if we try to approach, we'll be exposing ourselves to—" "I don't care," she said, turning to him. "It's my father. If there's a chance he's alive, a chance to save him, we have to try." Klaus coughed discreetly. "There's another complication you should know about." "What?" "Since last night, there's been suspicious movement in the city, people asking about an American couple offering money for information." Adrian was immediately alert. "What kind of people?" "The kind who don't ask questions before shooting," Klaus replied dryly. "You were tracked faster than I expected." "That means we need to leave Vienna," said Adrian, "or that we need to accelerate our plans," said Emily. "If we're going to try to find my father, it has to be now." Klaus observed them for a moment, then sighed. "You really are stubborn, aren't you?" "Very well. I know someone who can help you get close to the facility, but after that, you're on your own." "What do we need to do?" Adrian asked. "First, get out of here. My house is no longer safe now that you've been here." Klaus quickly began turning off the equipment. Second, meet my contact in Graz. It's a smaller city, easier to go unnoticed. And then? Then you decide if you want to attempt a suicide mission or if you prefer to flee and live to fight. Another day, they left Klaus's house through the back door, using a different car that he had prepared. The streets of Vienna seemed different now, laden with threat. Each person on the sidewalk could be an enemy. Each parked car could be watching. Then, how many people know we're here? Emily asked when they left the city. Few, Adrian replied. But apparently enough. How did they find us so quickly? Money and connections, he said. When there are sufficient resources, anyone can be tracked. They drove for 2 hours toward the south, stopping only to change cars again in a small town whose name Emily couldn't pronounce. The second car was older and less conspicuous, exactly what they needed to go unnoticed. Adrian, she said when they were on the road again, if my father really is alive, why didn't he try to contact? First, during all these years. Maybe he couldn't, he replied. Or maybe he thought it was safer for you if you believed he was dead. That doesn't make sense. My mother was devastated. I grew up without a father. Sometimes people make impossible choices for love, he said, looking at her briefly. Sometimes staying away is the only way to protect those we love. There was something personal in the way he said this, and Emily realized he wasn't just talking about her father. Is that why you lied to me from the beginning? She asked. To protect me? Partially, he admitted. And partially because I was too cowardly to risk you rejecting me if you knew the truth. And now? Now I'm risking my life for you. I hope that counts as proof that my feelings are real. Graz was a university city, young and vibrant, that contrasted with Vienna's formal atmosphere. They met Klaus's contact in a cafe near the historic center, a noisy place full of students where the conversation could go unnoticed. Anton Weiss was a man in his 40s, with the appearance of a university professor and polite manners. But there was something in his eyes that suggested experiences that went far beyond academia. Klaus told me about your situation, he said in fluent English. It's madness, you know that. We know, said Adrian, but we're determined to try. The facility you're looking for is about 2 hours from the Hungarian border. It's an old complex, originally a sanatorium, but it was converted after the fall of the Berlin Wall. Who runs the place? Emily asked. Officially, no one. It doesn't exist on maps, doesn't appear in government records, but unofficially it's maintained by a network of people who prefer that certain information and certain people remain contained. How many people are imprisoned there? Hard to say. Maybe a few dozen. People who know too much, who saw things they shouldn't have, seen who became inconvenient for powerful people. Anton took a thin folder from his backpack and slid it across the table. Here are floor plans of the complex, patrol schedules, weak points in security. But I want to make it clear that this information is only a few weeks old. Things may have changed. Adrian quickly examined the documents. How did you get this? Let's say I have a personal interest in seeing this place shut down, said Anton. My brother disappeared 5 years ago. I believe he's there. Why didn't you try to save him? Because I'm just one person. You are two, and you have something I don't have. What? Enough desperation to try something that sensible people would never attempt. Anton looked around the cafe, then leaned in closer. There's an additional problem you should know about. The people who are looking for you arrived in Graz this morning. They have a few hours head start at most. Emily felt her stomach contract. How do you know that? Because I saw them. 2 men, they arrived by car. They're showing photographs of you to people in the streets. Adrian stood up immediately. We have to leave now. There's one more thing, said Anton, following them as they got up. If you manage to get into the complex, how will you get out? It's not an ordinary prison. The people who are there have been forgotten by the world. We'll improvise, said Adrian. And what if your father doesn't want to leave? If he's there, by his own choice? It was a possibility that Emily hadn't considered, and it hit her like a punch to the stomach. Then at least I'll know the truth, she said. They left the cafe through the back door, but when they reached the car, Adrian stopped abruptly. What is it? Emily asked. The car next to ours. he said in a low voice. "It wasn't there when we arrived." Emily looked and saw a black sedan with tinted windows parked a few meters away. There was nothing obviously threatening about it, but its presence stirred Adrian's instincts. "Let's get away from here," he said, taking her hand and pulling her in the opposite direction. They walked quickly through the narrow streets of the historic center, Adrian constantly checking if they were being followed. After a few blocks, he pulled her into a clothing store. "We need to change our appearance," he said, choosing different clothes for both of them, "and get another car." "How?" "Leave that to me." An hour later, they were driving a borrowed motorcycle toward the Hungarian border. Emily had exchanged her tied-back hair for a shortcut that Anton had quickly done in his apartment, and wore dark glasses and a leather jacket that made her look completely different. Adrian had shaved his beard and used dye to darken his hair. "Are you afraid?" he asked when they stopped to refuel. "Terrified," she admitted, "but also determined. If at any point you want to give up, just tell me. There's no shame in choosing. Safety. And you? Do you want to give up?" Adrian looked at her for a long moment, and she could see the internal struggle in his eyes. "I do," he said honestly. "I want to take you and flee to somewhere where no one will ever find us. I want to build a simple and safe life where the past can't reach us. But I know you would never be completely happy without knowing the truth about your father. And I would never be completely happy knowing that I didn't do everything in my power to help you find that truth." It was the most honest confession he had made since they met, and Emily felt the last of her defenses against him crumble. "Adrian?" "Yes?" "When all this is over, regardless of how it ends, I want to try. Us. I want to see if we can build something real together." The smile he gave her in response was radiant, completely transforming his face. "That gives me an even better reason to ensure we get out of this alive," he said. They reached the border at dusk, when the shadows were beginning to lengthen and the world acquired a golden and melancholic quality. The complex was 15 kilometers from the main road, hidden in a dense forest that had grown around its walls over the decades. "It's here," said Adrian, stopping the motorcycle at the top of a hill that offered a view of the valley where the building was located. Emily looked at the grey structure that rose among the trees. It was larger than she had imagined, a complex of several buildings connected by covered passages. Even from a distance, there was something sinister about its appearance, as if the place carried the weight of all the secrets and suffering it had witnessed. "My father could be there," she said, more to herself than to him. "Yes," Adrian confirmed, "and if he is, we'll get him out. And if we can't, we will," he said, with a determination that made her believe, at least at that moment, that perhaps it was possible. But as they observed the complex, neither of them noticed the gleam of binoculars among the trees behind them, nor the car that had stopped on the secondary road a few kilometers back. The hunt had ended. Now the final confrontation began. They waited until darkness had completely settled before approaching the complex. Adrian had studied the plans that Anton had provided, memorizing every detail, every possible escape route. The place was immense, with 5 main buildings connected by underground corridors and covered passages dating back to when it functioned as a sanatorium. "The west section is where the long-term prisoners are kept," he explained in a low voice, as they moved through the forest. "If your father is there, that's where we'll find him." Emily adjusted the small backpack she was carrying, checking once more that she had everything they might need. Small flashlights, basic tools, the communication device that Anton had lent them, and a copy of the music box data on a flash drive. It was their life insurance in case they needed to negotiate. "And if he's not there?" she asked, though she feared the answer. "Then at least we'll know that we tried," said Adrian, stopping to check the terrain ahead. "And maybe we'll find clues about what really happened to him." The fence surrounding the complex was old but still electrified. Adrian found the point that Anton had marked on the plans, where fallen trees created a shadow area that the motion sensors didn't adequately cover. He cut the power using a device that Klaus had provided, and they passed through the hole they made in the fence. From the inside, the complex seemed even more sinister. The buildings rose like grey ghosts against the starry sky, and the silence was broken only by the distant sound of generators and the occasional barking of guard dogs. Patrols, whispered Adrian, pointing to lights moving between the buildings. They cross each other every 20 minutes at the main entrance. We have a small window. They moved like shadows across the inner courtyard, using the floor plans and abandoned equipment as cover. Emily felt her heart beating so hard that she was sure the guards could hear it, but Adrian guided her safely, his years of training in dangerous situations proving invaluable. The entrance to the west section was locked, but Adrian managed to force the lock using specialized tools. Inside, the air was heavy and damp, laden with the smell of mold and abandonment. Long corridors extended in both directions, punctuated by heavy metal doors with small observation windows. "How will we find him?" Emily whispered, the reality of the task beginning to sink in. There were dozens of doors and they didn't have time to check each one. "We start systematically," Adrian replied, "and hope for luck." They began with the corridor on the left, checking each cell through the small windows. Most were empty, but some contained sleeping figures or people who cowered away from the light when it fell on them. It was a nightmare vision, human beings reduced to ghosts of themselves. In the 12th cell, Emily saw something that made her heart stop. A man was sitting on the narrow bed, looking at the opposite wall. He was thinner than in her memories, with completely grey hair and a beard that hadn't seen care in a long time. But there was something unmistakable in the posture, in the way he held his shoulders. "Dad," she whispered, almost disbelieving. The man slowly turned his head, as if he wasn't sure he had heard something. When his eyes met hers through the small window, his expression completely changed. "Emily?" His voice was hoarse, incredulous. "My little Emily?" Tears began to run down her face. "It's me, Dad. I've come to get you." John Morgan rose from the bed, stumbling, as if his legs didn't adequately support him. He approached the door with uncertain steps, placing his hand against the cold metal. "You've grown so much," he said. His own voice choked with emotion. "You're so beautiful. How is your mother?" "She's sick, Dad, Alzheimer's, but she'll be fine when you come home." Adrian was working on the cell's lock, but it was more complicated than the others. "It's going to take a few minutes," he said. John looked at Adrian through the window, and Emily saw recognition in his eyes. "Michael," he said, "you've grown too. I thought I'd never see you again." "I promised I'd find you," said Adrian, without stopping his work on the lock. "It took longer than I expected, but promises must be kept." "You shouldn't have come," said John, but there was gratitude in his voice. "It's too dangerous. They know you're here." "How do you know that?" Emily asked. "Because I received a visitor this morning. A man said 2 Americans had been captured trying to enter the complex. I thought it was you." Adrian stopped working on the lock. "What man?" "I don't know his name, but he was asking about the documents, wanted to know where they were hidden." "And what did you tell him?" "That I didn't know anything, that the documents had been destroyed a long time ago." The lock finally yielded, and the door opened with a low creak. John came out of the cell slowly, as if he didn't believe it was real. When Emily threw herself into his arms, he embraced her with a desperate strength, as if he wanted to recover 20 lost years in a single moment. "I missed you every day," he whispered in her ear. "There wasn't a moment when I didn't think of you and your mother." "Why did you never try to come home?" she asked, moving away to look at him better. "Because they told me that if I tried to make contact, you two would die," he said, the pain evident on his face. "I preferred that you think I was dead, rather than risk your lives." "But now we can leave here together," she said. "We have the documents. We can negotiate." John shook his head. "It's not that simple, my daughter. There are things you don't know." "What things?" "The documents aren't just evidence of economic espionage," he said. "They're proof of murders, of corruption that goes to the highest levels of government. The people involved will never allow this information to become public." "So what do we do?" It was Adrian who answered. "We use the information to guarantee our safety. If it gets publicly released in case of our death, that serves as protection." "You're very naive," said a voice behind them. They turned quickly and saw a man in a dark suit standing at the end of the corridor. accompanied by 2 armed guards. He was tall, middle-aged, with a presence that radiated authority and danger. "Mr. Volkov," said the man, "or should I say Mr. Volkov? It's been difficult to keep track of your identities over the years. Who are you?" asked Adrian, positioning himself in front of Emily and John. "Someone who has an interest in keeping certain information contained, and someone who gets disappointed when intelligent people make stupid choices." "We're not afraid of you," said Emily, trying to sound braver than she felt. "You should be," the man replied, "because contrary to what you believe, you have no negotiating power here." "We have the documents," said Adrian, "and they'll be released if anything happens to us." "Ah, yes, the famous documents. You really think you're the only ones with copies?" The man smiled, but there was no humor in the expression. "Mr. Morgan, please tell them about our agreement." John lowered his head, and Emily felt a chill in her stomach. "What agreement, Dad?" "A few years ago, when they brought me here, I made a deal," said John, avoiding looking at her. "In exchange for not hurting you two, I would give them the locations of all copies of the documents." "You betrayed everything," Adrian asked, disbelieving. "I protected my family," said John, finally raising his eyes. "Or thought I was protecting them." "The problem," continued the man in the suit, "is that Mr. Morgan didn't tell us about the music box, an omission that cost a lot of time and resources to correct." "How did you find out about it?" Emily asked. "Because we finally found the right person to pressure," said the man, looking directly at her. "Your mother, in her condition, is surprisingly malleable. A few visits from people who identified themselves as social workers, a few questions asked the right way, and she told us everything about the special box she was keeping for her daughter." Emily felt anger explode inside her. "You tormented a sick woman? We did what was necessary, just as we'll do now." The guards moved closer, and Emily realized they were cornered. There was no way to go back the way they had come, and they didn't know other escape routes. "What do you want?" Adrian asked. "First, we want the storage device you brought. Second, we want the 3 of you to disappear, permanently. And if we refuse, then your death will be much more unpleasant than it needs to be." It was at that moment that John moved. With surprising speed for someone who had spent years imprisoned, he threw himself forward, knocking down one of the guards and taking his weapon. "Run!" he shouted, firing in the direction of the man in the suit. "Get out of here now!" Adrian grabbed Emily's hand and they ran down the corridor, while the sound of gunfire echoed behind them. John followed them, using the gun to keep the pursuers at a distance. "This way," he said, indicating stairs that led downward. "There are maintenance tunnels that connect all the buildings." They ran down, pursued by the alarm cries that now echoed throughout the complex. The tunnels were narrow and poorly lit, but John knew them well, guiding them through a maze of passages that he had memorized during years of captivity. "There's an exit at the back of the complex," he said as they ran. "It was used for deliveries when this place functioned as a sanatorium." "Dad," said Emily, "we're not going to leave you behind again." "You won't have a choice," he said, stopping abruptly. "My leg is wounded. I can't run much more." Emily looked down and saw blood on his pants. One of the shots had hit him. "We'll take you," said Adrian. "Whatever is necessary." "No," said John firmly. "You two have a whole life ahead of you. I've lived mine." "Don't say that," said Emily, tears running down her face. "Listen," said John, taking her hands. "I made terrible mistakes. I chose dirty money instead of my family's safety. I let you think I was dead for years. I need to do something right before I die." "You're not going to die," she insisted. "Everyone dies, dear. The question is how we choose to live before that." He took something from his pocket, a small device that she recognized as being similar to the one from the music box. "This has different information, names, bank accounts, evidence that can bring down the entire network." "Why did you keep this?" "Because I always knew that one day I might need an ace up my sleeve. Take this and go, release everything. Make sure these men can never harm anyone again." The sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the tunnel. "Go," said John, pushing them toward the exit. "Go now." "Dad, I love you, Emily. Tell your mother I always loved her, and take care of each other." Adrian pulled Emily, who was reluctant to leave. They ran through the remaining tunnels, guided by the directions John had given, while the sound of confrontation echoed behind them. The back exit was really there, hidden behind a rusted metal door that opened with difficulty. They emerged in the forest at the back of the complex, far from the guards and searchlights. "We have to go back for him," said Emily, trying to turn around. "We can't," said Adrian, holding her. "He chose this, so we would have a chance." The sound of gunfire abruptly ceased, and a heavy silence descended over the complex. Both knew what this meant. They ran through the forest to where they had left the motorcycle and departed without looking back. Emily cried during the entire journey. Back 20 years of longing finally resolved, only to lose her father again on the same. TRC, 3 months later, all the major news networks in the world were reporting the biggest international corruption scandal of the last decades. Leaked documents revealed an economic espionage network that involved politicians, businessmen, and intelligence agents from various countries. Dozens of people were arrested, fortunes were confiscated, governments fell. Emily and Adrian watched the news from a small and cozy house in the Swiss countryside, where they had taken refuge after releasing the information through investigative journalists on 3 different continents. John's strategy had worked. With everything publicly exposed, there was no longer any reason to pursue them. "Do you think he would be proud?" asked Emily, curled up in Adrian's arm on the living room sofa. "I'm sure he would," he replied, kissing the top of her head. "He managed to protect you in the end, which was all he ever wanted." Margaret was now living in a specialized clinic in Switzerland with the best care that money could buy. There was no cure for her condition, but she was comfortable and safe. On good days, she still remembered Emily, and sometimes asked about John as if he were about to return home at any moment. "He came back home," Emily always replied. "He's at peace now." Adrian had liquidated most of his businesses, keeping just enough to ensure they could live comfortably. The publishing house had been sold to Davidson, who had realized the dream of a lifetime of being the owner of his own. "Business, no regrets?" Adrian asked one morning as they prepared coffee in the sunny kitchen. "None," said Emily, kissing him lightly. "My life was small and safe before. Now it's big and uncertain. But it's ours. And us. We're just beginning," she said, showing him the pregnancy test she had taken that morning. Adrian looked at the positive result for a long moment, then picked her up and spun her around the kitchen, both laughing like children. "A new beginning," he said when he put her back on the floor. "For all of us," she agreed. They married in a small ceremony the following spring, with only a few close friends present. Klaus came from Vienna. Anton brought good news that his brother had been found alive in another facility that was closed after the revelations, and even Nicholas, Adrian's faithful driver, made the journey. Their daughter was born in the fall, a small and perfect girl with the father's golden eyes and the mother's silent determination. They named her Margaret in honor of the grandmother, but her middle name was John. "Will she know the story of her grandfather when she's older?" Adrian asked one afternoon, as they watched the baby sleep. "She will," said Emily. "She'll know that he was a man who made mistakes, but who in the end chose to do the right thing. She'll know that sometimes love demands impossible sacrifices. And about us, what story will we tell her?" "That 2 strangers met in the most unlikely circumstances," said Emily, smiling, "that they began with lies, but built a truth. That real love can survive anything, even the deepest secrets." Years later, when Margaret was a curious and intelligent child who asked questions about everything, they told her about the grandfather who had sacrificed everything to protect his family. They told her about a time when powerful people tried to control information and lives, and how the courage of some people had changed everything. But mainly they told her about love, about how 2 people who should have been enemies found something precious in each other, about how difficult choices sometimes lead to happy endings, about how in the end the family we build is more important than the family we lose. Emily never again had to ask permission to exist. She had found her place in the world, beside the man who loved her and the daughter they raised together. She had found a big and meaningful life, filled with true love and real purpose. And on quiet nights when the house was silent and Margaret slept peacefully in her room, Emily sometimes looked at the stars and whispered a prayer of gratitude for the Father who had given everything so she could have this life. "Thank you, Dad," she would say to the wind, "for teaching me that love is worth any sacrifice, for showing me that sometimes courage comes in the darkest moments, and for leading me to him." And in the silence of the Swiss night, as Adrian slept beside her and her daughter dreamed of future adventures, Emily finally felt complete. She had found her answers, she had found her love, and she had found her home. The story that began with a lie had become the most beautiful truth of her life. And they lived happily ever after, protected by the love they built and by the sacrifices that made that love possible.